All right, welcome everyone to the multi-network community sync. Today is April 12th, and we're gonna start with Philip. He wants to kind of talk about how we can integrate with Gateway API, some ideas. And let's talk about KubeCon. That's thanks, Antonio, for reminding that. Let's touch on who's gonna be there. Should we cancel next week meeting? Probably we should. And lastly, we're just going to continue the discussion on our cap. So, Philip, floor is yours. Do you want to share something or just want to discuss?
Yeah, I'll share, sure.
Okay, let me stop. Do you have power to share? Let
Oh,
me see.
disabled participant.
Ask chat.
Guarantee it'll be rated G.
Can you share?
Host disabled participant screen sharing.
So not sure. Is that I'm not familiar with Zoom. So can you share?
I no, it says that I'm just that the host disabled participant screen
Oh,
sharing.
okay. So I will make you co-host. There you go. Try now.
Ah, the power.
Yes.
Tremble before me. So, so in let me give a little background. I've been working on a product that is really focused on service provider and launching 5G networks. And when you're working in service provider networks, they have very complex networks. I have this thing about Kubernetes wasn't designed for telco networks, and one of the big things is that there are a whole bunch of external networks. This can happen, of course, in a enterprise where maybe you have a secure backend network and a network can reach the internet or something. But in service providers, you always have to integrate with a radio access network and operation, administration, and maintenance networks for the network functions to communicate to each other, et cetera. And so you have to put Kubernetes into this sort of mix. And what a lot of folks have been doing has been to ask for Multus interfaces. And what they do with Multus is to do like a direct SRIOV access to the outside world. And each pod basically connects to external networks and has to handle its own sort of interaction with the routing, firewalls, et cetera. And what it results in is sort of spilling the complexity from what should be contained and orchestrated inside of Kubernetes. It spills that complexity out. And so what we've done is we've made a product where, sort of everything can come through our product. So we can connect with multiple networks. We can do multiple protocols, all of the reasons why people ask for direct network access. And I was planning, so in the Gateway API, we're very interested in using the Gateway API. There's a model with different layers with the gateway class, gateways, and routes that come off of those gateways. And we are getting ready to suggest essentially this model where we would configure when a gateway class is installed, you could say, let's install the F5 gateway class or the Kong gateway class or the Nginx gateway class. And at that stage, you could configure multiple networks. And then each gateway would essentially be a gateway to a single network, right? So if you wanted to have a gateway to your radio access network, you would allow only the functions that are allowed to talk to your radio access network to get routes on that gateway. And that's true for egress routes, which is a new thing that we're going to submit soon about, but also ingress routes. And so this is what I was looking at. I know you guys are looking at ways to model, multiple networks within Kubernetes. And I am a little concerned that I think that is great. I'm a little concerned that that the pattern will still end up being something like this, where it just allows for a more sort of Kubernetes way to be not cloud native, and that a good pattern would be to have the access to these networks be through the gateways. And so it would be good to figure out how we can coordinate, how we configure the networks at the gateway class level with the modeling you guys are doing for how you model multiple networks. Did that make sense, or did I just ramble?
No,
I rambled.
I think it does. But Antonio, you have a hand?
Yeah, I have a question. When you can go to the previous slide where you show the services. I want to understand the model because that service is a Kubernetes service. That when you have a service that is red, another that is, I don't know, magenta, that's a Kubernetes service.
Yeah, these are Kubernetes services.
Okay. And you want to.
But these connections to the outside world are not services. They're direct connections from the pods, right?
Yeah, and I still try to understand and now you have the gateway, and you want to do the same with gateway.
Yeah. So with a gateway, though, you could model this as a service.
Model the whole multi-connection. What you're saying?
So instead of saying, I need to connect directly to the outside world because I need to connect to the RAN network, you could create a service that gets a route through a gateway to the RAN network, and it rather than just doing the direct connection to the outside world.
Right. Can you show? I think you have the other picture that's showing it, right? What the new model?
We want to go from an L2 connect to the pods to an L3. Want to go from L2 to L3, right?
It could be L3, it could be L7 connections to the pods.
Yeah.
Right. The gateway
right now
can
you
do
have
L7.
right now you have an L2, right? You're stringing L2s out with Multus.
So
you mean in this situation?
Yeah.
This is L2. Yeah. Essentially, most of these guys are asking for SROV, so they're.
You're linking a 5G interface with a routing and using the service on the pod as the link. No?
So when you say service, it's an 5G core, or is it the stuff that runs on the end that someone will put on top of the 5G core?
No, this is like a service for the. So each network function would have services for different interfaces, and so if you had, I don't want to get into the protocols and specifics too much, but a network function would have a whole series of services for connecting to other network functions.
So you're trying to do service chaining up towards, from the UPF and out for.
So this is the first 5G stuff going into Kubernetes is control plane. So service chaining is kind of a slightly different.
Okay, but you're talking about SMF and these services.
Yes.
Okay.
So
like an AMF, for example, would have probably its service-based interfaces coming in through a standard Kubernetes service, but its NGAP interfaces going out toward the RAN they would
Right.
tend to do this, where they'd get direct access to
So,
the
so,
outside.
so basically, we see everything that's not N3, N6, and N9. Basically, you don't have the UPF, but you have the core minus the data plane.
Yeah, and it's not even just completely standard interfaces. I mean, you know, there there are a lot of interfaces that network functions can have. I mean, to legacy functions for you know, data replication, all kinds of things. Again, I'm sort of talking at a high level though in this group about
So Philip,
more about how to connect to the networks than the protocols.
So Philip, what I'm if it's just as you can see, the pod network is a very high level here. We don't. It's a just representation of a network, what it is, right? Won't you be able to just model it to however you want to implement this? Won't that work? Because I'm seeing that like our phase 3, if I'm not mistaken, is to integrate this with services, of course, where possible, right? So we would have ability to expose services on those additional interfaces. And as you yourself said, the L2 networks, the SRV stuff, data plane, still has to be this, what we are doing, right? You still will need this. So your pod will have to connect to multiple interfaces. What we are doing here is giving you additional kind of means of exposing interfaces to the pod. And it's never said, I don't think we're saying that anywhere in this design that we are creating that a pod network has to be a separate physical, like a VF or wherever Linux interface per se.
Absolutely.
So basically what it can be just another IP on the same interface, which is referenced by the pod network, which then you can directly reference by your gateway service or what's not. So, and it's up to you how you implement. We talking most about the time about Multus because that's what exists today and that's what we know of, and that's kind of easier to understand. But how you implement under the hood, it's completely up to you. And it can be just a logical L3 networking where it's only IPs on the same physical interface. And of course, your implementation has to handle it inside out, but then it's just up to you. The only thing would be that I'm not sure whether that would be a goal for you or not. If you want to use a single IP for all those.
No, but I think we're talking different layers. So we are offering L2 and L3 connectivity, up to pods. But I think what Philip is trying to do is in reality to see if he can use a layer 4, or to say layer 7 construct, an API server to connect the pods instead of do the call it use a network orchestrator to set up the networks and then map in the networks into Kubernetes so they become visible for the pods and so on, so you can attach networks to them. When I say this is another approach of how to do sort of 5G and start using other constructs to address the services. I think this is more.
Is what we are saying, Philip, agrees with you, or you still don't?
I have to say my connection must be bad because you guys are kind of going in and out a little bit. But I mean, the thing about pod networks and connecting to services from what you're talking about, like I'm focused on the traffic that goes in and out of Kubernetes.
Sure.
Traffic within Kubernetes, I don't care about, right? And the gateway API is about traffic that's going in and out of Kubernetes. So
it's one place that traffic can come in and out. This will still go over the, call it the cluster network, right? Anything you push in here is going to go over the cluster network, the what we will call the default pod network, or I can't remember the exact name. But so if you talk gateway, but what you were shown before was multi-networking, right? When you have a number of networks, that you attach as secondary networks to pods using Multus. Two very different use cases.
No, but even here, Philip, you pointing in a gateway, you have a select single network. So basically you would like to have some sort of like networking concept of selecting and assigning a gateway to a specific network. I would see the same thing, by the way, because I would love, because we are here in the width of that gateway API as well. And I would love to have eventually as a next step after services and network policies to gateway support multi-networking as well, right? And is that the concept of this, like select single network so your gateway is on a specific network? Is that
that
true?
So essentially you would instantiate a gateway that would be your gateway to a particular network.
Yeah.
And then different different namespaces would have the ability to either request routes from it or not, right?
Sure.
And so again, for your radio access network, like an AMF would be allowed to request routes, whereas an SMS would not.
When you say route, as in an L3 route, or as in HTTP route?
Well, as in the routes in the gateway API. So there are TCP, UDP, and then L7 routes. And we're introducing the concept of an egress route. And this is where it becomes really important, right? Because again, you want to, historically, right, one of the problems with Kubernetes, from my perspective, is that, traffic in ingressing and traffic out egressing are controlled two different ways, and have, different pathing and controls. So by putting it through a gateway so that you can have both your egressing and your ingressing path come in, you can have more control over it. So the cluster operator and so forth, the telco can have more control.
Lars, you have a hand.
Yeah, I want to point out that I have, in the SIG Networks meetings, pushed for a more wider use of services, but they have pushed back and said that the gateways are the future of incoming traffic to the Kubernetes cluster. So I believe this is precisely the right way to go. And basically for ingress traffic, incoming traffic to the cluster, we should focus on the gateway API.
Yeah, I think keep in mind that's something that we have on our roadmap to kind of tackle, and I put it as a service support for this. And if we decide that no, let's not touch service anymore and let's just completely use gateways for multi-networking, perfectly fine. But let's discuss that at the time. Antonio?
Yeah, to echo what Lars said, the problem with services is that services solved one problem, and right now it's solving more problems than expected, and it's an API that's inconsistent. So that's why Gateway is a better fit to this new development, because first it's thought for doing what we want to do: select an endpoint and select some backends and route the traffic to that. Services and endpoints is an API that work together. So I mean, plus one to go with Gateway and not try to add more things to service.
All right. Anything else you want to add, Philip?
Nope, that's it. I just wanted to raise the question, see, if we should have further discussions or start,
I
more
think
regular communication or something. Yeah.
We I'm seeing this, that I'm hoping that I'm seeing this as we are aligned, considering what you want to do. And in our phase 3, if you look at our CAP, the current for the requirements for multi-networking, phase 3 talks about integration with services and external additional services, right? and basically we can include gateway. Currently, I'm mentioning only services and network policies. And as I said, maybe it doesn't have to be exactly services. It can be through gateway, where we can achieve the same thing. Definitely then though is way out, at least 1 year off from what we want to, when we want to talk about this. So we are very early on the spot networks journey to kind of currently even start talking about integration with other services. All right. So that's where we at, and definitely we want to, but not now. Now we want to kind of touch on the basics. And if you want to be part of that, that's you're welcome. But I don't think we need to. I would like to kind of pause on and postpone the discussion about like integration with other components to later talk, because we need to focus and keep the scope in line. Does that sound fair, Philip?
Sure.
And just I'm not sure whether you want to be part of this discussion or not, how much time you have, but I would do appreciate if you would participate and kind of keep us in check in whatever we decide here in the beginning, so that we can address your stuff in the future, right? So definitely that will be a valuable input from your side, but you would have to commit to being here, right? So that's
we'll have to do some monitoring of what you guys are doing. Again, we're going to put in a GEP for egress, and one of the things I'm going to put in is specifically for multiple networks. And so maybe maybe we'll just have to do it in a way that we can circle back when you get to stage 3 or something, and figure out how to align them.
Excuse me, do you have a product for this that is like? Could you paste some link in the chat, please, and in the agenda, perhaps?
Okay. Yeah, I'll paste some links in the agenda. Yep. Thank you.
Of course, I was muted, right? Yes. All right. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So thanks, Philip, for the links, and if anything, just copy them into the meeting chat, and I can paste them here, or you should have edit access here as well. Next topic, KubeCon next week. Should we cancel next week? Are we getting? I think most of us or some of us are being there. Is that true? Or maybe I will ask otherwise. It's something to Antonio initially asked. Is anyone going to be on site that wants to meet in person? I will not be there. I'm not sure anyone else going to be on site and willing to drive the multi-network in person.
Where is it?
Amsterdam, Europe.
No, I wasn't planning on going because of personal reasons which don't exist anymore.
So I think I would. So maybe let's do this. Let's cancel it anyway. Next week we will cancel for sake of even attending any presentation, and then we can continue in 2 weeks. Okay. Any other comments on the KubeCon? No. All right. All right. Let's continue. Any other topics before I start kick off the discussion on KEP? I think we missed that last week. Any other topics someone want to bring up? No.
Just a comment about the meeting minutes. So you should copy paste in the GitHub the repository you mentioned in the Slack. Sometimes
that's a good
Slack
point.
is hard to look for. Maybe we should put the all information into the one resource. I think the Google Doc seems to be the one.
Yeah, let me do it. Thank you for reminding that, Tomo. Yeah, I have committed this.
Yes.
So please take a look. This is my personal branch, and this is a KK, by the way. This is a Kubernetes repository fork. I'm not sure whether this is helpful to import things if you want to build some client controller around this. This is the initial version of this, of at least what was valid back then. So look at it. There is a lot of code changes because of generation. I just ran make update and it just generated a bunch of changes. Look at the commits. It's split. I managed to split the changes that I did step by step so that you can see only the changes that I did. So the first commit is just adding the types. Then the other commits is some validation, some storage stuff. And the last commit is about like the whole generated code. So I just added the type and just auto-generated the code. So that was the only thing I tried with this. I'm not sure. I haven't started even the controller, so I'm not sure how valid that part is. But this is a start. And if you want to do something more about it, create PRs against my branch. I think you should be able to do that if you want to change something over there. As we go with the cap, I will try to keep updating the type, the object as we go. But this is something that you can start off of and do something about this if you need to. I will add this as well. A good point okay. Any other comments to this? Not sure how useful this is, but hopefully someone can build some demo controller against that. All right, let me switch to now discussion around the cap. Is that the one? Yes, that's the one. Should stop. So last week we were discussing default pod network, and there was a question on how to handle migration. And I had a discussion with some folks, and I have a proposal for this. So where we ended last week we ended, how do I create the default pod network based on current parameters or on current existing stuff in the cluster. So the case would be when I create a cluster, and then the other case would be when I'm just migrating from version X to version Y, where Y has pod network right in it. So that was the problem what we were kind of facing. So to address this, what I want to propose, and bear with me and see what how that would work. So first of all, is I want to slightly change how we are behaving the IPAM fields. Last week or till last week, the IPAM 4 had a kind of three options. It had external, Kubernetes, or not specified. The last not specified meant that I don't want to have any IPs. So what I want to change this to slightly different.
Isn't it that, I mean, even with not specified, you can, well, for V6 at least, you can self-generate, right? The link locals will still be there.
Yeah, so what does it mean when it's not specified? When it was not specified, it meant that Kubernetes will not report that IP for you, or will not require that IP for you. Right?
So you will not get an endpoint.
Exactly, you will not get an endpoint then.
Yep.
So what I want to do is slightly change that. I want to introduce an explicit flag for the not specified. So basically, we would have external Kubernetes and none that will represent this. So basically, none, probably the name has to be changed, but still, this field would represent exactly that third case when we had last week. So if you don't care about and you want to explicitly call that out, I don't want to have any IPs on this interface. You want to call this out explicitly, you would have this new type. But I want to keep the field optional. And basically optionality will still mean the same thing, by the way. So if I don't specify it, you still is not expected, is undefined. What I'm trying to call it out, the configuration is undefined. But why I want to do this, and I will give me a second. I will explain why. The other aspect, if this is not specified, is I would like those two fields to behave like the podsiders on Node. What does it mean? Is that how those fields behave in Node today? Is that they can be mutated once in a lifetime, right? So basically, if I do not have anything set on that field, I can set it. So that's something that I would like to change in behavior of this object, and this will allow us to fully support what I'm thinking the way to migrate and introduce this object to existing and to the existing clusters. So if we have this now four options for this field, and the for us are those three, plus the fourth option is what I do not specify it, but over time, after later on, I can set it, then that will be the four options. And now I want to go through how the migration will work. But Tomo, you have a hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm still unclear that the difference between the none and then the no IPAM.
So the difference would be that they are similar, but not when you set none, it's basically one set, and you cannot change that, right? When it's not specified, it still behaves like none, where I will not specify that. But over time, if I want to change that, I have that ability. And basically that leads me, let me show you an example of how would that behave. Because what I want to do next is the default pod network would be able to be created in two ways: in automatic way or in a manual way. So first, let's go on the maybe go through the automatic way, because what does automatic way means? Basically, what it will mean that KCM will be the one that will create the default pod network. That's what I envision. There will be a controller in it that will handle this whole thing. We're gonna have to have a controller for pod network anyway, so I think it should land in KCM, but that's something we can discuss. But right now, I'm thinking of KCM, and for the sake of discussion, let's say it's KCM. And we need to rely on the existing flags that KCM has today, right? And those flags are allocate node siders, and I'm referring here to existing flags that KCM has. And the other flag is cluster sider. Those are the two flags. And what do? The first one identifies whether I use the built-in IPAM controller in KCM, okay? And then the other flag is used to say what IP siders this IPAM control has to leverage, right? So basically, this guy as well identifies whether I do single stack or dual stack. All right, those are the existing kind of behavior of those two flags. Tomo, you have a hand, or that's from previous?
No, this is the previous one.
Okay. Antonio?
Okay, this topic is hot these days with the cluster sider and the node IPAM and this thing. So to give some context, there is some historical reasons why Kubernetes has an IPAM controller on the controller manager, and this adds the what's the name? Node spec podsider field. So implementation can consume that field. But the discussions from the last day is that this is an optional behavior that Kubernetes provides. So what I want to say is that this node spec pod CIDR can be populated by other things, just not by Kubernetes. So what I'm trying to say is that we should be careful with the line of assuming that Kubernetes has an IPAN and so on, because you can say Kubernetes IPAN referring to I'm going to consume the node spec pod CIDR, but you don't. This may be populated by other IPAN. I think that is confusing.
I see what you're saying. So basically, but then they need, okay, that part is just an implementation detail, right? So basically, who said from this point of view, we don't care who set the pod CIDR, right, on the node.
That's what I'm saying is be careful with the terminology. So what you are meaning here, and what I'm understanding is that by Kubernetes IPAN, you are referring I'm going to consume the node spec pod CIDR field.
Yes.
Right. And that doesn't implicitly say that this is the Kubernetes queue controller manager IPAN.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Yeah, so there is a line. So
no, but then okay, I hear you. So then that has to be standardized, right? And then this can standardize this, right? Because and hopefully I can handle all the other cases, but you're right. This is something that might be tricky. So let me maybe finish on what I'm thinking. That I hear you. So basically, what you're saying is that pod CIDR can be set, but the whole IPAM is done by someone else. But well, in that use case, Antonio, who is setting the pod CIDR? Is it still IPAM controller KCM, or is it done by external as well?
That's why I'm saying the field is there to populate by whoever wants to populate it, and for whoever wants to use it. So
right, but then won't this field, the allocate pod node CIDRs, be controlling that? Who is setting that?
Yeah, that's the discussion that we are having now, is who is the owner of the pod networks, and the conclusion is going to nobody owns the pod network. So what Kubernetes can do is Kubernetes can provide like two proxies. You know, we have an IPAM controller that is going to populate this field, and this can be a reference implementation.
No,
but
and
what I'm saying,
and that's perfectly fine, because as you said, those are fields that your implementation can leverage, and then we just enable who is doing that, right? Is either doing it, is it all fully owned by IPAM controller or not, right? Whether I'm the fields are there for, if I'm not using it, then your implementation can do whatever with it. And this is what I'm saying here as well, right? So let me go through the examples, right? So based on those two fields in KCM, this is how the default pod network in automatic way will be created. So basically, this will be used for like migration cases, or I create a cluster and I don't care about multi-networking, right? So if I have this field set, this field set will ensure that the IPAM 4 and 6 will get a Kubernetes value, one of them. And then the cluster CIDR field will define which of them I set, and basically which of them I set, right? Because cluster CIDR defines whether I do dual stack or single stack. So, and here I have here an exact examples, right? So allocate CIDR is true, and then my cluster CIDR is v4 and v6. So I would create a pod network which is default with both set as Kubernetes, right? Then the other case is I have again a true allocate, but just with a single stack. So I will set Kubernetes for one, but none for the other, because I don't want any IPs on the other family stack, right? And then last example, where I have allocated as a false, means I'm not doing anything. So pod network, when it's in automated way, it will be created in this way, where spec is empty. what it can happen next. Right now, nobody's expecting anything. But now if in this case, I have an implementation that does this, and right now it exists the way it exists. And basically, if they don't care about pod network, we will have it, but it will not rely on whatever the IPAM is set there, right? So
yeah, but walk me through the flow. I mean, what is first, what is not? So I'm an operator. I want to configure my clusters. What do I configure first? The controller manager flags, this pod network object. How is the relation?
So I control, this is based on the automatic way is based on the KCM existing flags.
Okay.
All right. So based on those, I create one of the pod networks. So here you have an example. So those are the flags you set. I will create this. Those are the flags you set. I will create that. And if you just
okay, so let me stop you because this is I need to understand this. So you configure the flags, and from the flags you generate the object.
yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's
then
cool.
yeah. And then and basically what I want to say, kind of put more time on this case, right? This is what I was referring. This is what Antonio was referring to, the node spec podsider field when it's not set. And this is what exactly I want to kind of enable the same model for the IPAM field. When it's not set, you can set it after the fact. So my case here, let me scroll up here. Pod network is immutable is not true for IPAM4 fields. If not specified, can be set via update, but not changed when they already have a value. All right, so this will be a small asterisk to the is immutable. So basically, if those values are not set, I can still go into the default network and set it after the fact.
Yeah, but how do you do that?
So since you are using external, right? Your implementation is completely on your own, right? Allocate.
Okay.
This object is created so that we have a default network, because we always have to have it with this feature, with this kind of cap. We are assuming the default network will always be there, right? And it will just be empty with in terms of IPAM. Thoughts?
I'm missing. Why isn't the default network the first CNI config list found in Etsy, netd, CNI, or whatever the path is?
What do you mean?
Today, you find the first ASCII-betically, the first file that you find in the /Etsy, CNI, netd, or whatever the path is. Okay. And you just take that config and you're done. It seems like we're changing that.
No, this is about
Michael.
It's about generating that file. Yes, this is about generating that file, Mike.
Say that again.
So the thing is, what you're saying is, this is about how to generate that file.
Oh, you're trying to create the file.
Right. These are the input to the thing that.
No, Antonio, please.
See, I'm glad we're now.
Michael, please no. You still hang up on CNI. I will tell you this. CNI is one way to implement this. If your implementation is driven by CNI, CRI will finally support pod network, then it has to be changed and supported in such a way. Today, let's say I deploy this today. No, neither CNI is going to care about this, because that's the point. We have to be backward compatible. So this pod network, for someone who doesn't implement multi-networking, will just be there, but it will be just as a background. They don't care about multi-networking. The way it is, it's fine for them, and that's where it ends. So CNI still works. Kubelet just looks at, okay, the default pod network is there, but CNI or neither, nobody is looking at that object, and it's just there. So you will have just one additional object in your cluster with this change, and you don't care about it. CNI doesn't change. I still look at the first, what you just said. I still look at the first file in the path, and that's it. And that's where your bug stops, because you completely don't care about multi-networking. But if someone cares, and someone is going,
I certainly do care. Like, and that's why I always use the Podman example. I can have a bunch of config lists in my CNI config directory,
Sure.
and I can specify net X, Y, and Z, and I get exactly what I want. I
And
essentially,
perfectly, and Michael, perfectly. And in that case,
and I
when
need
your
Kubernetes
implementation,
to do the same.
no, because then it's
then
not
wouldn't-
not exactly, Michael, because now you're forcing one ways of implementing this, which like I don't want to do that. I don't want to have multiple CNI configs in my
I
my
certainly do.
and that is your choice, and that's your implementation,
As long
Michael.
as, but only if the Kube API will supply a list of file names, config list names to look at.
No,
You
but
may be
that's what I'm saying. This is your ways of implementing this, and
As
then
long-
perfectly yes, that
as
that can be
long
the
as-
case, right?
Okay, as long as the API server will specify an array of networks, CNI networks to use. Otherwise, I can't do what I just said I wanted.
Nah.
It is Tomo now, and let me explain because I'm getting you, and there are things that you are missing in this rationale. Tomo is
Tomo, you had a hand.
Yep. So
Go ahead.
I'm still have the wondering that the cluster side the stuff. Okay, let me take the example of the single stack IPv4 we mentioned. So if we creating the kube atom the cluster and then installing the kube funnel, at that time the cluster sider is configured. I mean that at that time the cluster sider and then the funnel should have the same cider ranges. And then at that time, when the port is launched, then the funnel adding is the allocated the pod IP and then assigned to the physical interface, not the physical, pod network, network interface. At that time, so as the definition of the IPAM4 and the IPAM6, the Kubernetes, if the Kubernetes is specified, at that time, this is the Kubernetes cares about the IPAM allocation, but actually this allocate the no cider to cluster cider the case, the funnel or the primal network interface, the CNI will do that, not the Kubernetes actually. So at that time,
That's always the case, yes. Yeah.
so at that time, the IPAM4 should be in the external. Is that correct?
In that case, but this is how, depending on what did you said here, right? If your KCM, because KCM is what configures in the what I want to say.
So
your flannel configuration, if your flannel configuration is used and your KCM is still configured as such, then it will be this, right? And I want to go to my last, maybe just before we continue, because I want to create another option. I want to add another flag to KCM, just to kind of maybe that will address what you're saying, Tomo.
So they automatically created in the above pattern, and if you want not to do the stuff, then you need to choosing the manual stuff. So
because there is no other way to do this, Tomo. I don't think there is other way to
okay, so let me informations. So as I talking the before case, I mean that they're creating the cluster and then they are installing a kube the funnel. But anything is okay. I mean the funnel, Calico, Cilium, Open Kubernetes, so everything is okay. But these both are same scheme. I mean that at least I don't know the AWS or the GCP's the Kubernetes, but they're almost open source. The Kubernetes deployment should use these stuff. One of the stuff. I mean that the cluster side is specified, and then the CNI plugin is configured, and then the actual IP allocation is done by the IPAM, the CNI, not the Kubernetes.
Sure, yeah.
So your automatic configuration is not for the major. This is for minor, I think. I'm a little bit wondering. So I mean that
no, because this is the
only provides the automatic creation. This should capture the major user, I think. I'm just well maybe
step back, Tomo. Step back, Tomo, because
this is my comment. If you decide not to, it's okay. But totally just my advice.
No, step back, because Tomo, you're mixing two things. And keep in mind, wherever we talked about this IPAM field is about who's doing, maybe this is a wrong. I need to probably rephrase this, because I think we go on what I want to say, but maybe too far, and maybe we need to redefine what does this. I need to spell out again what does this field means. IPAM 4 doesn't mean that Kubernetes is going to do your per pod IPAM management, because that doesn't exist today. We don't have that today. That doesn't exist. That's IPAM controller that I'm referring to in Kubernetes. What it will do, it will just assign the node.spec.podsider field. That's it. That's the only thing it does. And then we have additional objects that Antonio is working on, where you can expand those podsiders, add more, and then there is additional things to configure it. That's what I want to leverage, and this is the field only for that, because that's the only thing Kubernetes can do today. This field is not for assigning per pod IPs, because that doesn't exist today. So I'm not going, and I'm not going into that business, because there is a lot of IPAM plugins that can do that, and that's not the point of this field here. This field is only to identify whether I use the Kubernetes IPAM controller or not, and then just seed it all off to whatever external stuff you can have. And that means, is what Antonio was referring to, is that the node.spec.podsider field is as well set by you, and you leverage it or you don't. It's up to you. In Flannel case, I'm not sure whether Flannel, and that's a good example. Let's assume, I'm not sure today Flannel can even read that field. I don't think it can, because Flannel is just to pipe things. So basically Flannel would rely on local, let's call host local IPAM field, right? Which will have as well a specific value set inside the CNI configuration. So they don't even look at the node spec podsider. So those even will not bother be caring about those fields, because Flannel will not even leverage those two fields, because I said whatever I said here, nobody's going to care, except for, of course, if I want to be aligned with kubeproxy at that point. So that's a different story. But then that boils down to how you create your cluster. But then whether your Flannel is going to use those fields or not, that's on the other hand. Right?
Are you not saying then that the only SIDRs that you can use with the IPAM Kubernetes is the cluster SID? So it can only be used for the default pod network, right?
Yeah, that's what I want to say.
If I have any other network, I cannot use the Kubernetes IPAM controller.
No. Why not? No. That's the thing. So here we are going to talk about IPAM in more detail. So where I want to say, yes, I want to enhance the IPAM controller to support multi-networking. That's the goal.
Okay,
so
basically,
that's my goal.
So they can have different IPAM controllers with different SIDRs.
Yeah, so I'm not sure you're familiar with anyone. You can look up this cluster-sider. This is an object that was added, I think, last year. And I want this to be network aware.
Okay, but then I'm good. And I would prefer to have actually cluster SIDRs. I don't understand why you can just give one address.
Exactly, and that's my goal here, right? And it's very minimal functionality. It will only, what it will do, it will assign IPs per node, and that's it, where the story ends. So the IPAM is very minuscule here.
Do you have a picture or something that somewhere we describe what you want to go?
I think
it's
you can look at the
to see through the keyhole sometimes.
Sorry. I'm trying to make it step by step, but yeah, probably bigger picture would help us where we getting at. That's a fair point, Per. Yes, I will try to maybe draw something out. Yes, in this doc. Antonio, you had a hand.
Yeah, it's to clarify something. The way that most people is using the node, so the IPAM that we are talking here is an IPAM that take a subnet and assign a smaller subnet to nodes. And the way that people is using now is this subnet is cascaded to some or kubelet or containerd is generating the CNI conf list from this subnet. This is the 90% of the implementation that there is in this. That's what I'm saying. Both of you were right, but I mean, just keep this in mind. And when we're talking IPAM, this is IPAM as I have a subnet and I have smaller subnets per node. So it's assigning a subnet to a node to use usually the host local IPAM. To keep this context, that is important.
Tomo, did I kind of address your concern here? Did I change your mind? So on what really this IPAM field means? It's not for per pod IPAM. This is not it. I'm not getting there. This is not this field. This keep in mind. This field is cluster level. It's cluster level, not per node. So I cannot do with this one field. I cannot do a node per pod IPAM. Did that kind of addresses your concern?
No. I mean that so how do I say? So I'm returning the full do the real IP assignment to the pod interface in case of the Kubernetes field.
No, this is not for
IPAM
this.
4.
No.
So
This
the
is not-
IPAM 4 and IPAM 6 is not care about the real IP assignment. Is that correct?
It defines two things. It defines that the IP is expected on the specific interface, and then defines on defines. So basically that means that your implementation, your CNI, has to provide those IPs, IPv4 or 6 or both, or just neither, or just one. And then additionally, can I leverage the node for my per node CIDR? And that's it.
So what is the difference in the Kubernetes and the external?
Kubernetes, basically, I can leverage the IPAM KCM. So you need to look, and Tomo, you need to read in what KCM's IPAM controller do today, because you need to catch up on that one, looks like, and see what does this guy do. And because it built-in mechanisms to configure IPAM, and based on KCM and exactly what I said here, please read on what KCM's IPAM controller do today, and that's the only thing. And basically, this is only to set the node.spec.podCIDR field, and that's it. So that's what Kubernetes means. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything else. External means we don't even do that, and it's all full on you, whatever you want to do. And this is what Antonio was saying before. On this field can be set by you. You don't even have to care about that IP because you have other mechanisms to define that range. So so that's the case. I think Antonio, we're gonna call it we're gonna probably can come back to this next week. Tomo, did I address your you have other questions, or you want to kind of look up what this does?
So could you send me the pointer for the pointer for IPAM controller?
Sure. Let me try to find that in somewhere and point you that. Yeah.
Tom, I can have time to, and you don't have to read it, because I modified it. But for all the people here that want to go through this controller,
I think
and how it
Antonio, folks drop off. If anything, let's continue next week, in 2 weeks. Okay. I have to drop myself as well.
Yeah, but to say, if these questions, I'm open in the Slack, it's...
or that, yeah. Let's we can kind of move to this to Slack discussion. All right. I think then it will be make more sense of what I'm trying to do here if we know more. Okay, I think yeah, that's apologies on my side. That's I must have been more specific on what does this really do. All right, try to read through this with the understanding of what does IPAM controller does today, and then maybe it will make more sense then. Okay, thanks everyone. See you in 2 weeks.